All right, so Bob, we've been talking a lot, right? You're obviously the thermal spray guy, but let's talk a little bit more about Thermal Spray Depot. Why would somebody go to Thermal Spray Depot for their thermal spraying needs? What are they doing differently?
Well, yeah, I think we are different than anybody else, and part of that is kind of serendipitous, and it wasn't necessarily by design, but you know how some things just kind of roll in life, and you end up in a certain spot, like, wow, this for such a time as this, I'm here. So yeah, my background is metallurgy. I went to Penn State for a bachelor's degree and Lehigh for a master's degree, and I've been in the coating industry over 35 years. It's longer than 35 years since I graduated from Lehigh, but I had some other jobs in between there. But when I started in thermal spray, I was in the laboratory. And what I was doing, I was analyzing the coatings. I think I kind of told you this before. I was the guys would come in, the engineers would come in, and they'd buy me cups of coffee and try and bribe me to accept their coatings.
Yeah.
And then I got intrigued with it, and I went down to coatings engineering, and I started doing the coating engineering, and I ended up becoming the manager of the coating engineering. So now I was responsible for the quality of the coatings, and I was the guy going in the lab buying them cups of coffee and trying to bribe them to accept my coatings. Then I guess they did a pretty good job at it, and they decided to make me the director of coatings there, and ended up having to make a profit at it now. It's one thing to make a good coating, but how do you do it and make money at it? So that's an important thing to know. And then I ended up with a short stint. I was working for one of the major suppliers, a company called Sotsomeco. I worked for them for a while, and they've been since sold to another company. And I ended up founding Thermal Spray Depot about 20 years ago. So the thing that's interesting about this is I've been kind of on all sides of the thermal spray industry, on the acceptance side, on the design side, on the sales side, and how do you make money at it? How do you get a return on the investment? So that's really unique. You won't find that many places. In fact, I think I'm the only guy I can think of that you can go to do that. Now, I've been fortunate enough to have Ray Singh works for me. And the last 6 years, it's just been like a master's degree program from him. I'm passing on a lot of this knowledge and techniques and things. So he's picking up like a sponge. So we're unique. And it actually even shows up in our first phone calls. We often get a call from a customer, and one of my favorite calls is they want to bring the coating in-house. So they're now subcontracting the coating. They're paying somebody to do the coating for them, and they want to get control of their destiny. Sometimes it's a quality problem, but more often than not, we get the call because they want to control their destiny. They're not happy with the delivery schedules. They may not be happy with the price, but by and far, the biggest problem they have is not being able to get their coatings in time to ship to their customers and make their customers happy. So it's controlling their destiny. So when we get the call, we start with what I call the end in mind. And that's simply, what do you want these coatings to do? What's the properties that you need this coating to perform when all is done? When the part's finished, it's shipping to the customer, what does that coating have to be able to do? Sometimes it's a wear resistance coating. Sometimes it's for dimensional restoration. The part's undersized and they just got to bring it back to original dimensions. We've had some interesting calls where a guy was machining some large parts, very valuable parts, and they had an oops on the drawing, and they machined something undersized by 5 thousandths. This part was worth a lot of money. So we were able to help him to get him to a job shop to rebuild that area up again with thermal spray. Then they remachined it and got it back to its proper dimension. Sometimes we're doing this for corrosion protection. Sometimes it's for anti-skid applications. You don't want people slipping on the old banana peel and landing on their head.
Yeah.
Sometimes chemical protection, electrical properties, temperature resistance. Sometimes you need a very hard material. So you have all those kinds of different applications. And then we want to take a look at the specifications. And sometimes there's an end user specification that'll define the metallurgical properties they're looking for. What's the measured hardness? What's the porosity they're allowed? What's the thickness range they're allowed? What's the bond strength requirements? Corrosion protection. What does it have to? There's something called the salt spray test, where some of these coatings have to withstand the environment where it's in a high salt environment, high chloride environment, and they have to survive in that. So there's different kinds of coatings for that. So anyway, so once we go through that discussion, Then we say, okay, now that we know what the properties are, we can select the material to meet that. And once we know what that material is, now we can select the equipment, because not all materials can be sprayed by all equipment. So a lot of the other companies don't have the full range of equipment. So they're going to try and convince the customer to spray a different material using their equipment, even though it may not be the right choice. So that's kind of where we have a big advantage, in that we represent over 13 companies.
Mm-hmm.
So we can, again, now look at what's the right material. We go to the company that has the right material, and we have a relationship with them that we can, purchase that powder from them and resell it. We also have relationships with different manufacturers of equipment. Same thing. We're going to go to the type of equipment that's best suited for what the customer needs. Again, that's different. Nobody else in the industry is really doing that. Then once we know what equipment we're going to use, then we can now back into, well, what kind of room has to be set up? And how are you going to handle that thermal spray torch? What are how are you going to manipulate it? How are you going to control it? How are you going to handle the part? How are you going to place the part? So with the background of having been in the job shops and been doing the coating engineering, now I understand a lot more, and I have that insight to help people really get the right equipment and have the right setup for them to be successful. And again, Ray's been picking up on that, and it's kind of fun. Whenever he goes to ask me a question, he knows what I'm going to do. I just ask him, what would you do? So it's kind of a fun exchange going back and forth.
Yeah, I feel like that's very important. I remember in conversations with you that thermal spray knowledge is kind of like, it's a lost art. It's kind of dwindling, and you're trying to pass down that knowledge to somebody who's going to keep it going. I feel like that's very important in the business.
Yeah, I do too. And again, Ray loves the business, and he's picking it up on it. So when all is said and done, what we can do then is, not only do we understand the whole process of how to do the coating, we have great insight in how to set the room up and what all the equipment requirements are, dust collection, the room, the entire gamut. We can then put together a package that makes sense for them. And then we basically put the whole thing together, and we have the oversight on how it goes and gets installed, and we make sure that it all works together. We're really happy with that. Not only do we have a network of suppliers of equipment, I have a network of engineers that I've worked with for years, and Ray is getting to know them also. So if we have a question, it's just not me with my knowledge. With this network of engineers and retired guys, we have this just wealth of knowledge that we can pick and choose from and help customers get their solutions. Again, nobody else in the industry I know of is doing that. We're very different from that type thing. We just don't have equipment suppliers. We really have collaborators. We actually are collaborating with other thermal spray engineers, and we collaborate with these suppliers. So it's kind of a fun thing where we can pull this all together. I have a guy in Texas that does the full integration of robots and other mechanical automation things. Mm-hmm. So for automation, I mean, we've talked about that before. There's just a big crying need out there these days for automation. So what we can do now is what we've just packaged together for the materials and the equipment needed and the room and how we're going to handle that people. We can all pull that together to do a full automation package. Again, that's very few people are doing that in the industry days. In fact, one of the big two suppliers have gotten out of it completely. The other ones, I love to send customers to them to get a quote. Makes us look really good. So at any rate, what we do with the robots and automations, we use standard components. So it might be a FANUC robot or FANUC. Some people say it different ways. Could be an ABB robot. Doesn't matter. We'll use standard off-the-shelf robots with standard off-the-shelf programs that they supply. We don't change the root programs. Those are what the factory supplies. We also use a lot of PLC controllers. We use the standard PLC controllers, whether it's Siemens or the variety of ones out there. Allen Bradley is another common one. We don't change their root programs. And we use the PLCs to integrate with the robots, and they talk back and forth. Now, our guys will write programs that talk to each other, and they'll set the process up. That stuff, we would have that proprietary, but we supply it on a memory stick. So if our customer has a problem with a Siemens PLC, he can go out and buy that PLC controller. He can use their standard software. He plugs our memory stick in and downloads our program that tells what to communicate, and they can be up and running without having a lot of fancy, expensive engineers having to help them. And the reason I bring that up, it's very common for the two large suppliers, their software is locked down. In fact, the one supplier uses Windows-based products to tie their stuff together. It's a brilliant move because when you know what happens, every 2 or 3 years, Windows changes. And they say, well, we're so sorry, Windows changed, so you've got to buy our new Windows package, you've got to buy our new software, and you got to write some big checks to make this thing work. Well, those in the industry know that the PLC controllers, they don't move that fast. And they just don't do that. So again, if we're using that stock, what I call, rock solid software programs, you don't have that problem. You don't have that, being held hostage to a programmer. So, all that works together into a kind of a situation. Again, nobody else is doing that in the industry to this level. And we enjoy doing it very much. One of the other things that we do that nobody else does is we help our customers and potential customers really study the return on investment. And this is a lot of fun, again, with the guys who are paying somebody to have the coatings done outside and they bring it in-house. They see what the cost is per square foot for just the spray, and it's a really eye-opener. Now, I want to qualify that and say that that's not saying bad things about the coating shops. The coating shops who set up to do this have the overhead of having the building, all the support people to run that building, the equipment buying. So they have a relatively high overhead that they have to satisfy. So naturally, their prices are going to be higher, and they should be. They should make money at it too. But if you bring that in-house and you're focused on your own specific coating, you can amortize that equipment in the capital project, and your cost per part now is much lower. Again, I'm not a finance guy, but it really comes all down to how do you calculate your return on investment? And capital costs and operating costs are two different things. So, we can often show a really nice payback on the equipment with the right situation.
Yeah, I think money speaks with everybody, and if you're just being upfront and showing everybody everything, a tool that can show all that, I think that's very important and a great reason to deal with Thermal Spray Depot. Sure.
Additionally, the other thing we do is we'll do process development, we'll do training on the equipment, training on the total process of how to put thermal spray into action, and we quote that as separate items. So we help some companies have the internal ability to do a lot of this stuff themselves. That's great. We'll sell them the components. They can assemble them and they can run with them. But there's other companies that don't know. I do have one example that this is about a year and a half ago, maybe closer to 2 years ago. I had two companies in the aerospace industry. At the same time, they were buying equipment to bring coating in-house. Now, it was different companies and it was different parts. So it wasn't like they were competitors. And one was up in the Northeast and one was down in near Atlanta, Georgia. And the one in Georgia said, no, we want a turnkey system. We want you to develop the whole thing, develop the process, do the equipment, do the robots, do the programming. You come in, install everything, and teach us how to use it. And then we want to be up and running. And the other company said, no, we've got internal engineers. We can do this. So we'll just buy all the components. It's okay. So we did both. Now, it turned out the guys up in the Northeast are doing themselves. It took them over a year to get the whole thing up and running and doing production parts. Understandable. They had their engineers and their resources spread out of a bunch of projects. They didn't have the capital to pay to have us do the install, but they had the internal resources to do it. So they had to do that trade-off, cash for time. And they got up and running. Eventually, they were doing very well. The other company had the capital to invest. So they got their whole system up and running in about 3 months. And they were doing production parts in 3 months. So they were way ahead. But again, that's a trade-off. Do you have the capital? Do you have the time? Do you have the resources? And we can help them either way. So again, that's what makes us really unique and different. I don't know anyone out there that's doing it quite to the depth we are. And even add one more layer to it, sometimes we can integrate used equipment into the package. We do a lot with used equipment. So again, that nobody else is doing that, where we go to the level with mixing used and new equipment. We're careful with that because sometimes the used equipment can cost you more in the long run if you don't buy wisely.
Bob, can you tell me a little bit more about how you do like the return on investment at Thermal Spray Depot?
Well, yeah, that's a really important area that I like to focus on. First of all, one of the things I forgot to say in my little resume in the beginning there is I was actually part owner of a job shop. I sold that about 10 years ago, but when I was part of that, the other owner really didn't understand how to figure out how much it costs to put a coating down. So we came up with a cost calculator, and we use it today widely. It's a fantastic tool. It's a big spreadsheet that's pretty fancy, but it takes into account the density of the materials, your spray rates, the cost per pound, the cost of your fuels, the cost of the oxygen. And we get pretty darn close to what the actual cost of the coating is. And there's some estimates you have to put in. There's something called a deposit efficiency and target efficiency. The deposit efficiency is how much actually sticks. You know, when you throw a snowball against the wall, sometimes some of the snow bounces off and some sticks. That's deposit efficiency. And then target efficiency is when you miss the wall, then that's lost. All right. So those two you have to do estimates on because it depends on the type system you're spraying and the part you're spraying. But we help people with that. We have a pretty good idea on a round cylinder. The larger the diameter, the better your target efficiency. So at any rate, so we plug that all into the spreadsheet. We come up with this cost per square inch or per square foot of what the coating actually costs. Now we know what the cost is, and we can compare that to what people are paying for that cost. And that difference is what the profit margin is. Well, you have to take out of that profit margin in consideration, if you buy the equipment, how do you do your amortization and what's your overhead cost? And that's where I need to help with an individual company. Everybody's a little different in how they calculate their costs. But we get them to plug in what their overhead is, and we can figure out on an hourly basis, what is it going to cost you to put these coating on your parts? And there's going to be some profit margin. If there's no profit margin when you do that calculation, you don't buy the equipment. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And sometimes there's just not enough volume. I actually found one time there was a company that was getting parts coated by another small company. It was a one-man show. The guy wasn't charging enough. He had to be losing money in every part. And I told him, don't stop, don't do anything here. Just keep getting these parts coated. You're making money by having them do it. They're losing money doing these parts. And that's exactly what I found with that job shop. On certain parts, we were losing money on them. And I remember my partner I said to him, look, we got to double the price. And he goes, we'll lose the business. I said, good. We're losing money at it. We should lose that business. We doubled the price. Guess what? They said, how come you were charging so little for so long?
Yeah. That's
they were
hilarious.
expecting it. Yeah. So we didn't lose the business at all. So anyway, so we like to do that. We like to help the companies actually go through that return on investment calculation. Does it make sense for them to do this particular project? The other interesting thing is sometimes it makes more sense for a company to lease equipment instead of buying it. Again, I'm not a finance guy, but I guess the lease cost, the money you spend on leases comes out of operating budget, not out of capital. So some companies say, well, look, we're doing really great with our operating costs. We can afford to lease this piece of equipment, put it in there, and we work out with them that there's a lease to purchase at the end of the lease agreement. So it's easier for them and makes more sense financially for them to put it under operating costs. Other companies, it's clearly a capital expenditure. So we help them, guide them through that, but they may ultimately make the decisions on how those costs are calculated. All right,
Awesome.
So that's what makes Thermal Spray Depot unique and different from anybody else.